And today I'm going to be proposing 5 double bills for you to try, taking films and putting them together in ways that you probably wouldn't have thought of before and seeing what comes out of it. We're going to start with our old friend Stanley Kubrick. Here's my Blu-ray box set of Kubrick films. I'm interested in the last film he made, Eyes Wide Shut. Do you remember when that came out in 1999? Do you remember? There was all this hoo-ha because Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman had been making it for ages in London, and people thought it was going to be an insight into their marriage. People forget all this. And it came out, and in fact it was this kind of weird dream film. This man having this odd sort of fantasy after his wife admits that she saw this man once who she fancied like crazy, and it drives him into a sort of jealous fugue where he imagines himself at this strange orgy, which people found very kitsch and silly. I liked the film. I was a bit puzzled by it. I think it was not what people expected, and that's why it got a bad reaction when it came out. But since then, it's been reclaimed as one of Kubrick's best films, and I think it's one of his most fascinating and funny films. It's kind of a black comedy. People forget that. It was based on a story by a Viennese writer called Arthur Schnitzler. I believe it was written around the turn of the century, and it was about the very sort of liberal, libertine society of the time. And that's why I thought it might be interesting to pair it with this film, The Kiss Before the Mirror. Now, this is a really interesting little rare gem. It was directed by James Whale, who's more famous for his Frankenstein movies and The Old Dark House, his horror movies. But he was a very versatile director, James Whale, a very flamboyant director. And he made this film, The Kiss Before the Mirror, which is also based on an Arthur Schnitzler narrative. And it's about a lawyer played by, of all people, Frank Morgan, who would later become the Wizard of Oz. And he plays this lawyer who acts for a friend of his who has killed his wife out of jealousy because she's having an affair. And Morgan enters into a defence of this man, but then comes to realise that his own wife is having an affair. And like the Kubrick film, it's a very adult film about a man discovering that the society of men and women and that the society of the world he lives in is more complex than he first thought. It was made before the Hays Code. It's very adult, it's very intelligent. So even though some of its attitudes towards men and women are very old-fashioned, the knowledge of the way men and women interact is very modern. And actually it's a very good little pairing with the Eyes Wide Shut film. So watch those together and you'll have a very sophisticated and sexy evening. Now, my next 2 films are both about painters. I've always been interested in films about painting and films about the creation of art, and I think these are 2 of the best films ever made on this subject, and they both came out roughly at the same time in the early 90s, and both of them are very intense examinations of a painter painting a particular thing. In the first case, it's painting a woman, and the woman is Emmanuelle Béart, who is very naked for a very long time in what is nearly a 4-hour film. That's not the only reason to watch it. It's also a very riveting film about with an amazing central performance by Michel Piccoli. He's a painter who wants to paint a nude, and a young sort of protege of his suggests painting his girlfriend, played by Emmanuelle Béart. And a sort of game, a power game begins between the painter and the model as he sort of tries to get out of her what he wants, and then she sort of pushes back, and a sort of tense relationship begins between them. It also stars Jane Birkin as the painter's wife. It is one of the best films about the creation of art and about the power play and the sort of emotions involved. It's a really excellent film, directed by Jacques Rivette. The second film in this double bill is about painting a tree in a back garden. It's a tree in a back garden in a Madrid house, and it shows the process of this man starting at the beginning of summer. He starts to paint a quince tree in his back garden. In English, this film is known as The Quince Tree Sun, or The Dream of Light. The Spanish is El Sol del Membrillo. And so you follow the process of him setting himself up, and he has this very intense, painstaking process where he marks where the light falls on the fruit and on the branches. So he actually starts painting the tree, and he marks where the light keeps falling at different stages of the tree's growth and different stages of the season. And you follow him through the summer trying to paint this tree in his back garden. Sometimes his mates come to visit him, sometimes he has a chat with his wife, who has a cup of coffee, sometimes the camera floats over the neighbourhood of Madrid he lives in. I think this is an absolutely beautiful film. A lot of people find it boring, right? But I find watching the process of the creation of a piece of art just mesmerising. And this film is lyrical and beautiful, and it haunts you somehow. It's a very simple film, but it's full of texture and beauty that haunts you afterwards. And together, these two, quite a long double bill, but these two are a brilliant double bill on the creation of art. Now, my next double bill concerns a particular historical figure, Louis XIV, Louis Kators. I think a major figure in French history. This first film is called The Taking of Power by Louis XIV. What a great title that is. This is the first of a series of films made by Roberto Rossellini, the Italian director. Towards the end of his career, he got disillusioned with cinema, and he turned to television, and he made a series of historical documentaries. But they're not like typical documentaries with voiceover and everything. What he did was he reenacted the historical period and the people within it, and went to enormous lengths to research the look and the feel and the details, to immerse the viewer in history as that history was experienced and understood at the time, to show the processes of history. And this film is about showing how a potentate like Louis XIV establishes his power, establishes his regime. Not just giving you the historical details of battles and all that, but to actually look at the day-to-day reality of imposing power on people. So, for example, watching Louis XIV eating, right? And he's there alone eating at a table, and all his ministers and his court are just watching him, right? So it's that kind of thing. And you see into the reality of everyday interaction. Some people find these films by Rossellini boring. I find them mesmerising, because I love the idea of not making a period film, right, for a modern audience. That's Disney history, right? This is the opposite of that. This is trying to understand history on its own terms, getting into the past and finding out how it worked. And once you watch that, you can then watch The Death of Louis XIV. This is a film by Albert Serra, a Catalan filmmaker. It's very unusual. The entire movie has Jean-Pierre Léaud, the famous French film star, playing Louis XIV, lying on a bed. He never gets out of the bed. He's just dying in the bed. And he receives various courtiers, various visitors, but mostly doctors who don't really know what's wrong with him and keep looking at his stools and his blood and all the rest of it. And slowly you just watch this amazing potentate die. There's one extraordinarily beautiful sequence where the camera just looks into Leo's eyes, and you have this beautiful piece of classical music played. I can't remember what the classical piece of music is just offhand, but it's an extraordinary sequence. The whole movie is very odd, as you'd expect from Albert Serra, but strangely moving, and a powerful antidote to this film, because there you see the rise of power, and then you just see the man crumbling into death. The fourth double bill today, we start with a very famous and much-loved film, Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese. My God, my feeling about this film has yo-yoed up and down over the years. When I first saw it, I liked it, but I was a bit disappointed. The second time I saw it, I thought it was a masterpiece. The third time I saw it, I went down again and didn't think it was that great. And then I saw it again and I realised that it is a great film. It's a masterpiece. But it's not a great film for the reasons people say it is. It's actually a kind of black comedy. It's about a lonely man driven to an act of violence, a terrible act of violence. But the joke is on the audience in a way, because at the end he becomes a kind of folk hero, he becomes a kind of vigilante, you know. It's hard to see it in those terms, but it is a kind of black comedy, like Goodfellas is a black comedy, like The King of Comedy is a black comedy. And that's when I think, or Wolf of Wall Street, and that's when Scorsese is at his best. But if you want to take it seriously, as most people do, it is a brilliant examination of loneliness, a brilliant examination of the city, and a superb piece of directing from Martin Scorsese, script by Paul Schrader, who I think was the main auteur of the film, and a wonderful score by Bernard Herrmann. But if you're looking for another study of loneliness that leads to murder, try this, Aurora, by the Romanian director Cristi Puiu. I think this film is a masterpiece, an absolutely incredible film, but it hasn't received much attention, perhaps because it's quite a miserable film. It's about a middle-aged guy, he's a middle-class guy, and he's driven to madness by the loss of his wife. His wife divorces him, and he decides to kill her and her business partner. And it's just as good an examination of loneliness and someone going off the rails as taxi driver. Extraordinary scenes. The director himself plays the main character. Extraordinary scenes of him alone in his flat, listening to people outside, paranoid about what's going on around him. It really takes you into the interior of a troubled mind. It's an extraordinary film, and I think it really deserves much more praise and much more attention. So watch it together with Taxi Driver. You'll have a thoroughly miserable time, but you'll be watching two great filmmakers at their peak. And finally, I want to look at this film, Eric Rohmer's Percival the Galwa. What a great movie this is. This was made in the late 70s, and it's based on a romantic poem from the medieval times by Chrétien de Troyes. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. It's a sort of love story with Arthurian overtones. Now, like Roberto Rossellini in that previous film, what Eric Rohmer wants to do is not do a modern take on a medieval classic, but to try to get into the mindset of that medieval classic, to try and see it how an audience at the time would see it. So he does something artificial. What he does is, he doesn't go out into locations, he doesn't narrativize it. What he does is he brings it into a studio, right? With cardboard trees, cardboard castles. Most of the time it looks like the sets of Blue Peter, like a children's pantomime, right? And so the actors and the horses move through this artificial world. So it's like a theatrical production, but done on film. And in trying to make us understand the medieval world on its terms, watching what we might call a morality play, like a medieval audience would watch a morality play, he makes a very modern work of art, because it goes against the normal idea of cinema that we expect and takes us into a theatrical, artificial space. So does this movie, The Mad Fox. I only discovered this recently. What an amazing movie this is. It's by the Japanese director Tomo Uchida. And it takes its lead from Bunraku Puppet Theatre in Japan. It's a classic story about a young guy. He falls in love with this woman who is the daughter of an astrologer, the court astrologer. The court astrologer dies and he doesn't leave a successor. And the daughter of the astrologer is persecuted and killed by her evil stepmother. And her lover has to go on the run. And he has this weird dream where you find him in this huge studio space full of yellow flowers and this yellow mist. And he has this dream that transports him to the people that will help him. And these people turn out to be foxes. This is a folk tale, a folk idea in Japan of fox people. These kind of half people, half foxes who live in the woods, a bit like werewolves. And they are against humans, but sometimes they help humans. And they help him. And the whole story is told in this very hyper-theatrical, artificial way. The opening credit sequence is a long scroll, an animated scroll. And then you move in animation over the house as this volcano erupts with red light moving towards the house. All the sets are not sort of filled in, they're like Japanese paintings with gaps in the scenery. When the actors play the fox people, they wear masks. So it's a riot of colour and sets and artificiality. It's like nothing you've ever seen. It's really beautiful. So there's two very highly regarded and unusual art films. But every so often on this channel, I like to be a bit perverse. So I'm going to offer a third part to this double bill. Zack Snyder's 300. You know this film, right? You know the one with Gerard Butler and all these men with six-packs shouting and screaming as Spartans, killing all these, dreadful, what are they, Cypriots or whatever, I can't remember what they are now. Now, this film was reviled by critics when it came out. And a lot of critics got on their high horse and said, oh, this is anti-Iraq, this is xenophobic and all the rest of it. Treating it as if it was a realistic narrative. It's anything but. It's in the same tradition as these two films. This is a film which is completely and utterly theatrical and non-realistic. The whole film is set against CGI dioramas. The whole thing is displayed like a sort of male action pantomime, right? There's not a single frame of this film that is realistic. It's in the same tradition as Eric Romer's film and Tomoe Uchida's film, but because it's mainstream, because it's Hollywood, because it's an action movie and very macho, it's not seen as in the same tradition. But actually it is. And that's what's kind of curious. If you watch this film after watching Percival and watching The Mad Fox, you'll be in for a very different experience, but you'll see a queasy kind of link, a kind of similar approach to technique. This is not a mainstream film. It was made in Hollywood, but actually it's quite unusual and idiosyncratic. It breaks all the rules of Hollywood. There's no conventional psychology, there's no conventional narrative or continuity, there's no conventional production. It's not trying to make you feel that you're in a real space, you are in an artificial space, a heightened, poetic sense of reality. So try this triple bill. You'll be surprised. Thank you for watching, and please support the channel by liking and subscribing, and tell me of any other double bills that you can think of. Thank you.